Welcome to Profiles with Jason Patterson. In these moments, we reflect upon the extraordinary life and remarkable journey of South Carolina native and World Series MVP, New York Yankees second baseman, Bobby Richardson. Well, thanks so much for welcoming us into your home.
Jason, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad Leah came along with you too.
What a great baseball life. What a tremendous baseball life. When you reflect on all the years and every piece of this journey, what comes to the mind of Bobby Richardson?
Well, honestly, I think of my dad coming home from work when I was maybe 8 years old, and he'd play catch with me in the backyard, and he loved baseball. And his desire was for me to be a professional baseball player. He had wanted to play but had to work all of his life. And so as I look back of all the memories I've had, I'm just honored that he was able to see me play first high school, Legion ball, and then in the minor leagues, one game. He came down to Savannah, Georgia. And I'll never forget that game. My cousins, my aunts, my uncles, everybody came down. And in the one game, the Yankees were playing the Phillies in Savannah. And in the 8th inning, I had not been in the ball game. I was on the bench, and one of my teammates went up to Stengel and said, "Richardson's family's all here." And he said, "Oh, Bobby, Richardson." I'm not sure he knew my name. He said, "Kid, come here, take a bat, pinch hit." And I hit a triple. And I was so excited. I was standing up on the base, and I look into the stands, see if my dad saw it. And third baseman said, "You're from South Carolina?" I said, "Yeah, I'm from Sumter." He said, "I'm Pudd'nhead Jones. I'm from Bennettsville." He said, "Move your foot and let me get the dust off that bag." I moved my foot, and you know what happened? He tagged me out from that triple. He had the ball. And the umpire was from South Carolina. He said, "I can't believe you do that to South Carolina. He's safe." Got a picture of me scrambling back into the bag. But that was the only game he saw in the minors. And then he saw one in the major leagues. But he watched many on the game of the day on television. One of the first gifts I got from the bubblegum card little thing that they gave me a color television set that he could watch those.
You stand on his shoulders still to this very day.
I do, yes I do.
You've already mentioned Sumter. What does Sumter, South Carolina mean to you? It's hard to put into words what you've meant to Sumter, South Carolina, but what does Sumter in the state of South Carolina mean to you?
Well, you know, it's really funny because Betsy enjoys the beach, and we go down there, and we've talked often about where else would you like to live if it wasn't Sumter. And I don't have any place that I want to live other than Sumter. I know everybody. I know the one I need to take my car to when it's broken down. And I have long-lasting friends from different families here. And the people have been so gracious to me over the years in so many ways. It's just where I'm going to stay.
When you think baseball, you think of Bobby Richardson, you think of the World Series. It seemed like all your games were played in the World Series. You were in there year in and year out. Two big World Series come to mind right away, 1960 and 1962. Let's dive in there. Take me through that 1960 World Series. Not the ending you wanted, but it's quite the series for you nonetheless.
Jason, let's go back 10 years to 50 and 52. And we were playing in the last game before going to the American Legion World Series in Omaha, Nebraska. First when I was 14 in Charlotte, North Carolina against Richmond. And then 2 years later in Charleston against a Florida team. And both times we were in the final game of the World Series, and then jumping right quick to what you talked about, 61, 62. Those were years that Roger Maris was both years voted most valuable player in the American League. Mantle was always, when he played, we won. Just great memories. And you're right, World Series competition is a big part of my life. In fact, I hold the record of playing in 30 consecutive World Series games. I'd forgotten about that. You know what that means? Just means I didn't miss a game. Mantle missed one, Yogi missed some, but I didn't miss a game.
That's not the only World Series record you hold. You still hold the record for most RBIs in a World Series and in a single game, with 6 of them, the game in which you hit the Grand Slam in that 1960 World Series. And you're the only player to this very moment who has ever been selected as the World Series most valuable player off of a team that didn't end up claiming the crown. Let's go back to that 1960 World Series. It was quite a World Series for you. What are your main memories of those games, those 7 games against the Pirates?
Well, the main thing was we scored a lot of runs. In fact, when I hit the grand slam, we won that game 10-0. And we had other games there that we won by big margins, but the games we lost were close games, 1 run, maybe 2 runs. And that's why Mantle was so disappointed. He felt like we'd outscored him. And there was one other thing. Early in the game, we had just a mental mistake. The spring training, you work hard on pitcher always covering first base, and one little play would have been the 3rd out before the home run hitter came up that hit the home run. And so we should have won it in 6 games. But that's baseball, and those things happen. But 1960 was a special year because Ralph Houck took over as manager the next year, and I just had the freedom the rest of my career to really enjoy playing.
How about the grand slam? Can you take us through that at bat?
I can. It was in the 1st inning of the 3rd game of the World Series against Pittsburgh, and I was batting down at the bottom of the lineup, and we were ahead in the 1st inning by 1 run. The bases were loaded, and it was 1 out. And when I started up in the on-deck circle, I thought, Stengel has pinch hit for me in games like this. Slaughter always sat on the bench by him, and he was the pinch hitter. And I sort of listened as I walked by to see what he would always holler out, "Hold that gun." And then Slaughter would come up and hit for me. I didn't hear it. Then I walked up and looked down at Frank Crissetti, our third base coach, and I couldn't believe it, but he had the bunt on. Now, if you're a good baseball man, you'd know that with 1 out in the 1st inning and the pitcher up next, bunting with the base low is not a good idea. And I fouled it off, not intentionally, but fouled it off. He put it on again, and I fouled it off again, not intentionally. And then Frank Crissetti hollered out, "Hit the ball to right field, try to stay out of the double play." And I was trying to hit a ground ball to the right side. Clem Levine threw the fastball in here, and I hit it pretty good. And when I rounded first base, it looked like I could see the left field. It looked like he'd been to the wall, and he turned around, and it looked like he was looking at the ball in his glove. But it had gone into the stands, and the umpire was doing like this, and I was more surprised than anybody when I saw that, and I knew it was a home run. Now, the rest of the story is when I got into the dugout, Stengel's response to me was, "Good bunt." I laughed too then.
How about the final play of that World Series, the iconic final play?
Well, first of all, the first thing I did was look to Yogi Berra in left field. And I looked to him, and as soon as I saw him, I knew that it was out of the ballpark. I could tell from his reaction, he knew it was over the fence. He wasn't getting himself in position to go and play the carom off the wall. He just felt like it was a home run. And by that time, it was a home run. It had gone out of the park. And I remember knowing the fans would be on the field, I grabbed my hat, put it in, and took off running to the dugout. And if you've seen highlights of the film, there are just hundreds of people before Mazeroski could get to home plate. He probably had 100 folks that were touching the bases with him and going around. It was an exciting time for the Pirates at that time, and a wonderfully big win for them.
When you look back at the Mazeroski home run, it really served as a driving force for those Yankee teams that would follow and get the deal done.
1961-62 World Champions. Now, 63, we ran into a guy by the name of Sandy Koufax. And so the Yankees lost to the Dodgers 4 straight. And Sandy Koufax, I sat with him at Yogi Berra's funeral. He and his wife were there, and I sat by him, and Whitey Ford's wife was sitting by me as well. And I remember he said, "I knew when I struck you out the first 2 times I had really good stuff." And I told him, I said, "Well, the funny thing, after you got me 3 times, I walked by Mantle, and you got him 3 times, but before he went up there, he said to me, 'No use for me to go up there,' and he got him 3 times too." He laughed. Good stuff.
In 1962, that 62 World Series, you were again involved in a series-ending play. You caught the line drive off the bat of Willie McCovey. Can you take us through that full inning and what set the stage for that moment, and then give us a window into what was going through the mind of Bobby Richardson as he was in the right position to secure a World Series-ending line drive?
Well, first of all, my hunting partner and real close friend Billy O'Dell was pitching, and it was to be his 20th win. If he had won that game and he was ahead, well, he only gave up 1 run, and that was unearned. But if McCovey's ball had been in there, he would have been the most valuable player. He'd have won the Corvette, and he would have been the winning pitcher. But prior to that, Ralph Terry had pitched a wonderful game. He had the shutout, and we were ahead 1-0. And in that first inning, Matty Lou was the first hitter, and I just knew he was going to bunt. You know, you have an idea that they're going to do it, and he did it, but he made a perfect bunt, absolutely between the pitcher, between the first baseman, and far enough in that I couldn't get it and make the play, and so he was on with a single. Then there was an out, another out, and finally Willie Mays came up with Matty Lou on first base and 2 outs, and he hit the ball to right field, and it'd been so much rain, very slippery in the outfield. And Roger Maris went over and cut it off, and I saw him slip. He'd had a sore arm, and we had talked early in the game that I would come out a little bit farther on a relay. I went out a little bit farther. He made a wonderful catch, turn around. Even though he slipped when he threw the ball to me. I caught it and relayed it to home plate. And the third base coach, Whitey Lockman, held the runner, Matty Lou, on third base. And then the next guy was Willie McCovey. Willie McCovey came up, and he hit a long foul ball down the line, pulled it. And I moved over a little bit. I said, man, he's out in front, really, really out in front. And I moved over a little bit, and Ralph Terry told me that he happened to look around, thought I was playing out of position, took one step out toward me. He was going to tell me to move back to my other position. But he said, you know what, he's played 1,400 and some odd games there, and maybe he knows what he's doing, and he didn't say anything. And sure enough, the ball was hit extremely hard. Willie McCovey said later it was one of the hardest balls he ever hit. But he hit it, it had sinking spin on it. I've seen Mantle hit balls like that. You hit on top of it, it comes down in a hurry. It looked like a base hit, but came down in a hurry. I caught it with 2 hands, and right before the pitch, the umpire at second base said, hey, Rich, can I have your cap for my little cousin? And I caught the ball, took my hat and gave it to him, went running in to give the ball to Ralph Terry on the mound. I've got a picture in the New York Times, the umpire walking by with a hat, looking at it, me bareheaded, handing the ball to Ralph Terry. I didn't see Willie McCovey for 45 years. 45 years later, they had a new stadium out in San Francisco, and Alvin Dark was the manager. He lived in Easley, South Carolina. None of the Yankees would go out for that either, and he called me and he said, the Giants would like for you and Willie McCovey to speak at a banquet on the night before the Old Timers game, and we'd like for you and Willie McCovey to throw out the first ball. I said, I'll be glad to come. And so I did go. They treated us so good out there. The thing I remember mostly is there's a picture of Willie and I throwing out the first ball. But even before that, when I saw him for the first time, 45 years, his response to me is, I bet your hand's still hurting. I said, you hit it hard. Good memories.
What memories? Your memories of New York itself. Give us a sense of what it was like for a Sumter, South Carolina native to land in the Big Apple in the 1950s and 60s.
Well, I remember when I went up by train because I didn't want to fly in a plane, and checked into the hotel, and the cab ride from the hotel to the stadium was such that I'd never seen so many people in all my life. The traffic was bumper to bumper and atrocious. And my response was, I hope I never have to play here. And that was what I was thinking at that time. Now, that changed over the years. I was glad to play, and I moved over to Ridgewood, New Jersey, and I was in a carpool with Yogi and some of the others, and we'd go across the George Washington Bridge to our home in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and it was wonderful. I did not go downtown New York. I took Betsy to see one play. It was darn Yankees, only they didn't say that. It was a little different. And it was a wonderful play, and but I didn't go down New York area, central New York at all. Just back and forth to the stadium. Always glad to get home in the off-season.
The off-season was a little different in your day, not quite like it is for ball players now. Give our viewers a sense of what it was like when you weren't actually playing in the 50s and 60s.
Well, now they have strength coaches. It's a year-round position. In those times, you didn't have strength coaches. And my love for outdoors is quail hunting. And I just enjoyed it. I had bird dogs, and I would just walk and hunt. I'd hunt 2 or 3 miles. I had a special friend, Buck Jackson, that would drive my family up when I was on the train a plane to New York. And he and I were hunting partners down here in South Carolina. We'd hunt 4 days a week, and that was my way to stay in shape so I'd be ready for the spring training. But now so much is advanced. The club gloves are bigger. Strength coaches build you up in such a way that you have more power. But I still think the star of yesterday would be a star today. You don't tell me that Mickey Mantle wouldn't be a star today. He would. No doubt. The only difference would be instead of making $100,000, he'd be a part owner of the ball club.
And the hunting has still been a passion for you right up to this very moment. It's something that has given you the same type of rush that you feel when you're on the ball field.
Exactly. Little third baseman that played for me at Coastal Carolina owns a couple thousand acres. He's got bird dogs, and I mean, it's just as much fun right now to take my grandsons down and quail hunt with them, introduce them to hunting. My sons and I have always hunted together all these years. All of them like to quail hunt. and dove hunt as well, and duck hunt, and pheasant hunt.
It might also surprise some of our viewers looking back on those days what had to be done to make ends meet during the off season.
Had to get another job. My first year with the Yankees, my salary was $5,000. Now, people won't believe that when you give that out today. My son equated that to $35 a game, counting the exhibition games and so forth. But that's what a school teacher was making at that time. I remember one time coming home to Ridgewood, and my best friend was a very sharp teacher, one of the best in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and he was making, I was making $1,000 more than him. And I said to Betsy, I said, that's not fair for me to make, for a baseball player to make more than a teacher. I've changed my mind on that since then, and certainly finances have changed too.
Let's talk about a number of those Yankee teammates who you've mentioned who also were laying the foundation for the fruits that are being enjoyed by so many in the game today. You mentioned Yogi a few minutes ago. Do you have a favorite particular Yogiism that has stuck with you through the years?
Well, the one that I've always liked, I think, is because I had a son that graduated from Clemson Architecture, but he would wait tables during the off season, and in particular, it was a seafood restaurant. And I remember folks would ask me, should we go to that restaurant? And it always reminded me of what Yogi said. Yogi said, nobody goes to that restaurant anymore. It's too crowded. And that was probably one of the favorite things. But I think if I had to pick one, it would be, he was called on. He was given an honorary doctorate at Montclair State University. That's where his home was, and that's where his museum is. And they expected him to get up and use some of those Yogiisms and maybe speak for a long time. And he got up and he stood up and he said, if you come to a fork in the road, take it, and sat down. They gave him a standing ovation because it was so short, and an honorary doctorate. But he had some wonderful things.
You had a front row seat for the home run chase of 61. Take us back there for just a moment.
Well, I remember it so well because everybody on our team was pulling for Mickey Mantle to be the one to break Babe Ruth's home run record. He had grown up as a Yankee. Roger had been traded in from Cleveland and Kansas City. And so they were all rooting for the two in their chase, and it was at one time 54 and 54. But they were rooting for Mantle. And then he went down, he had a shot. Mel Allen recommended the doctor, and they gave him a shot, and it became infected, and Mantle couldn't play anymore the rest of the season. And so then our allegiance shifted over, and we wanted Roger to be the one to break the record. Now, the difference between the two was the pressure didn't bother Mantle at all. Even before he couldn't hit anymore, the press would come to him and they'd say, now you go break Babe Ruth's home record. He said, neither one of us know that, do we? It didn't bother him a bit. Roger, when they asked the same question over and over again, he was losing his hair and he couldn't have any peace at all. He said the only peace he could get was actually playing the game. And so the pressure was there tremendously. In fact, Roger didn't even want to play the last couple of games. It didn't mean that much to him. He just said, man, if it means that much and, you know, they're going to put an asterisk by it. They had said they were going to put an asterisk by it if he broke it and so forth. But Ralph Houck made him play, and he broke it on the last day of the season. Now, 50 years later, they had a little celebration in New York to honor the one that was pre-steroid, that really broke the home run race. And Roger's wife was asked to name any 5 players you want to come up and be a part of it. And Pat Maris named Betsy and I to come up, and we were a part of that ceremony and had a wonderful time together and still keep in touch with her. That's a picture of him on the end over there in his 61st home run.
Given the opportunity for you to do what we're doing right now, who would you like to sit down with?
Well, Joe DiMaggio came down and spent 2 days with me. In fact, probably one of my big thrills when I ran for Congress, and that's something that I don't think very much about. I ran because I was asked to run by a president, and I won by not having to go to Washington probably. But Joe DiMaggio and I got to be friends, and I think he would be the one that I would enjoy spending time with. He and I were close, and I remember he used to call me up after he came back as a coach for our ball club, and he would say to Kubek and I, we roomed together, he said, I'm not going to travel to California this trip, but when you get there, your phone will ring. It'll be Marilyn Monroe. Be sure to tell her that I'm not making the trip, but that I'll be in touch with her. And that happened on 3 occasions. Tony answered the phone all 3 times to talk to Marilyn, but Joe and I were buddies. And right before he passed away, I had a call from a sports writer in San Francisco that knew him well. And he said, you know, I interviewed Joe the other day, And he said some things about you that I really think you'd appreciate, and I'm going to send you my notes so that you might look at them. But we had a wonderful relationship, and that sports writer sent me those things, and I know now why he used to call me and say, hey, when we get to Washington to play in that old Crackerjack game, I want you to let's go to dinner together.
You wore jersey number one in your program, number one in your hearts. How did you end up with that number, and what did it mean to you over the years?
My first year with the Yankees, I was given, when I first went up, uniform number 29. And I wore that, and I was sent back down the minor leagues. So when I came up again, they gave me number 17. And I was up for a little while, and then one night, some of the Yankees that I was fighting against to earn the position, Billy Martin in particular, and Mickey Mantle and Whitey Ford and Yogi Berra, went out to Copacabana nightclub in New York, and they celebrated, and they ran up a bar bill. It was about $2,000, and none of them had that much cash, and there weren't too many credit cards way back in that day. And so Billy Martin said, I'll take care of it, and he signed the owner of the Yankees' name to the check, Dan Topping, who owned the Yankees at that time. Well, they didn't want to do anything to Mantle or Ford or Berra, but they felt like he might not have been the influence he should have, and so they traded him to Kansas City. We went into Kansas City, and I remember sitting out in the bus waiting to go to the airport or back to the hotel, I'm not sure which it was. And we waited for an hour, and Stengel, who was the manager at that time, was still in talking to Billy Martin. And finally he came out, and he sat down by me. He said, okay, kid, it's all yours. I've been traded to Kansas City. And the clubhouse guy at Yankee Stadium is the one that gives the numbers out. You would think it would be something to do with somebody else. He was the same guy that gave Babe Ruth his number and Lou Gehrig his number, and all the years he's the one that presents that. And he came up to me when I got back to New York. He said, okay, you're number one now. When Billy Martin was hired the 5th time, you know, he was hired and fired 4 times, and then the 5th time he only told George Steinbrenner, he said, I'll only come back if you retire my number. And George said, well, I want you to come back, so I'll retire your number. And then he sat down and wrote me a letter, and I've got it in there in a plaque, in a frame. And it's Billy Martin saying, for as long as you live, you and I share this number, and I want you to know you can wear it in Old Timers games or anytime you desire. You have to do that, otherwise when they retire, maybe you can't wear it again, even as an old timer and so forth. And then he signed it, your friend in God, Billy Martin.
You found such joy in those Old Timers games. Give us a memory or two from those Old Timers games that still stick with you.
Well, in those early years, I went through the Ty Cobb Museum the other day. He was just a wonderful ball player from Georgia. And to have Dizzy Dean or Ty Cobb come and dress in your locker, and then you go out on the field with him and see him. I remember I was there when Dizzy Dean was pitching and sprained his ankle on his way to first base. But that has changed now. They built another locker, and the old timers can't even go in with the current players.
Is it possible for you to put into words the emotion, the feeling of having your name called over the loudspeaker at the stadium?
And I can't think of his name. Do you remember the name of the announcer?
Bob Shepard.
Bob, yeah. Oh, he was a voice teacher at Columbia University, and it was unique. In fact, Derek Jeter, he knew Bob was dying. He got him to do it before he died. And so he has a tape, Derek Jeter now batting, you know. I'll share one thing that happened just last year. I have a friend in town that has a Learjet, and he said, would you like to go up for a game one day? And I said, fly? He said, yeah. He said, we'll fly. I'll pick you up at 8 o'clock, and we'll be back at 8 o'clock. He said, I'm going to pick a friend up in Charlotte. He has the season tickets. We'll be using his tickets. We'll go to the game, come right back. And I said, I'd love to. Evidently, the people found out I was there from New York and so forth. And so they not only had a camera that about the 4th inning put the spotlight on us where we were sitting, but on the big board, they had a trivia contest. But here was I just going up there. I'm 82 years old, or 3 at that time, and then on the big board that comes up and has a trivia contest. That was unique.
Special moments.
Yeah.
I know you're wanting to walk us around and show us some of the great memorabilia that you've hung on to over the years here in the house. Let's take a look in your office.
Small office. We'll walk in there right now, straight through the door. Jason, this is my office. It's not very big. It used to be a small ping pong table in here, and we had a lot of fun with the family we were growing up, but now it's an office. And I have some things in here that are really special, and I think the first one I'd like to show you is right behind my desk. It's a picture that was hanging in Yankee Stadium. It's a picture of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. That's the original frame, hanging all those years when DiMaggio and Gehrig and Ruth were playing. And then in 1961, when Marison Mantle had the great year with home runs, 61 and 54, they took the picture down and put one up of Mickey and Roger. And the clubhouse guy, Big Pete Sheehy, said, "Hey, Rich," to me, "take this picture home. Someday you'll really appreciate it." Well, I do appreciate it. I'm so glad I've got it here. And it's really a memento that I appreciate.
Found a place of prominence.
A place of prominence. And then Gaylord Perry from your home area up there, who has been a special friend, played on I don't know how many ball clubs. He's got a uniform that tells all the clubs he played in. Just a wonderful guy. And yeah, he did have a spitball. But he gave me a Lou Gehrig bat and a Babe Ruth bat. And that goes with this picture. And he said, when he saw the picture, he said, "I got something I'm going to send you." And he sent me a Babe Ruth and a Lou Gehrig bat. And they're in a case right here in front. And then some special memoirs over here. This is a picture at the new Yankee Stadium. Yogi Berra and I were standing there. It's an old-timers game and just watching batting practice. So it's a picture that I really appreciated. And then this is the really special corner of my office right here. And that's because it's a Mickey Mantle opportunity to see Mickey Mantle. Number one, the home he grew up in is on the right. There's a picture of Mickey and I in my front yard. He came down here maybe 6 or 8 times during the course of our time together. And then at Roger Maris's funeral, he asked me to have his funeral. And I did have his funeral, and in appreciation, his family sent me that glove encased in glass with a verse down at the bottom. Now, Jason, I can't read that verse. You have good eyes, I'm sure, and you can read it and say what it says. It's special.
It says, "Presented to Bobby Richardson, you've enriched Dad's life and soul with your presence those last days. With God's love and eternal light, we thank you, the Mickey Mantle family. Teammate in the true sense."
They were a wonderful family. Betsy was close to Merlin, his wife. Mickey and I were buddies all those years, my whole career with him. And then there's a special wing at Yankee Stadium in the museum that is just dedicated to Mickey.
Well, now, when you first showed up at Yankee Stadium, it was Mickey Mantle who opened the door for you to step in the cage, was it not?
I was 17 years old, and I had an opportunity to sign right out of high school. No draft at that time. There were 8 clubs in the American League, 8 in the National, so 12 of the 16 I had a chance to sign. If you got over $4,000, you had to go up and spend 2 years on the parent roster. That'd be a waste of time. And so my offer was exactly the same from all 12. I had seen the film prior to the Yankees. My last year or actually my first year in American Legion Baseball, I was 14 years old. I got cut from the high school baseball team. We were playing basketball, and I was a week or so late going out, and a big catcher and I went out together. And after 3 days working out, he made the team. The coach said, "Latson, you made the team. Bobby, you come back next year." Well, I did make the American Legion team, and we won the state championship, the regional championship. And in the very last game in Charlotte, North Carolina, playing against Richmond, Virginia, the winner would go to the American Legion World Series in Omaha, Nebraska. But before that game, they showed us the film prior to the Yankees. Story of Lou Gehrig. Gary Cooper played his part in the film. Babe Ruth played his own part in the film. And I thought, man, what a great organization. I'd like to be a part of that. And so that was my goal. The Yankees kept in touch with me. And at that game, the Yankee scout asked the coach to hit me some balls in the hole in shortstop, and came up to me after the game, 14 years old, and said, "I can promise you that when you graduate from high school, you'll have a chance to sign with the Yankees." He kept his word, and sure enough, at 17, I signed. And then the rest of the story is very simply, when I was up working out as a high school player, when I signed, I was given a trip to New York by a local owner of the Coca-Cola bottling company. He had a private plane. He said, "I'm going to fly you to New York. It's all worked out. You'll work out with the Yankees for 3 days." And I said, "Mr. Heath, I've never been on a plane. Can we go any other way?" And he said, "Well, we'll take the train." Took the train to Florence, to New York, checked into the hotel, and 3 days I worked out. They hit me some ground balls after I put on my uniform, and after the ground balls by Corsetti, he said, "Just step around the cage and take some swings with the regulars." Well, once again, I didn't dare step in front of Yogi Berra or Hank Bauer, and Mickey Mantle put his arm around me and said, "Come on, kid, step in here and take some swings." Now, the sequel of that is that at 17, I spent 2.5 years in the minor leagues, and at 19, I was called up to the Yankees. Gil McDougall was hit by a line drive, and I was called up to take his place, and I was standing around the cage one more time, and Mickey Mantle, on the very first day that I was to play my first game, and we were in the dugout, he said, "Hey, Rich, come over. I'm going to make like I'm showing you around Yankee Stadium. I'll guarantee you there'll be some photographers, the cameras will click, and tomorrow you'll be headlines in all the newspapers." He came over, click, click. Next day, the New York Times, the Daily News had our picture of him showing me around Yankee Stadium. And we've been friends forever. But something else is special are gold gloves. Now, this is a gold glove right here. And I have 5 children, and I had 5 consecutive gold gloves. Now, I say that because Nellie Fox had to retire before I got my first one. And when I got my first one, with the 5 children, each of my children now have a gold glove. And that signifies fielding. It's a fielding award, and I appreciate it very much. I've been honored by Rollins to come up and present some of those awards. Just a couple of years ago, I was asked to come up and present the second baseman from Boston and from Cincinnati with the Gold Glove Award from second base. So that's a unique award. And then this is a picture which really goes back now. That I was 8 years old. And this is the first trophy I got in baseball. I remember so well that it was a bottling company that sponsored the team and the whole league, and he was the one that gave me that trophy. His name was Mr. Mora, and that is very special.
Take us back to some of those days, growing up here in Sumter, where you live to this very moment. What was it like when you were developing your love for the game of baseball?
Well, my dad loved baseball, and his health was such that he could just play catch with me, but that was about it. He could come see me play every game. But I had a mentor who was 7 years older, and I lived right here. The 3 schools, the elementary schools, were here with a big baseball, not big, but a baseball diamond that they used for the school, and then he lived on the other side. Now, they'd lock the gates on Sunday, but we could go right over the gate. We'd just do a somerset over the gate. And so every day and every moment, this friend of mine would hit me 100 ground balls, and he said, "Now, see if you can catch 100 in a row." Well, I'd miss one at 97, so he wouldn't quit. I just loved it, loved baseball. And so it was a natural thing. My dad wanted me to play. When I was 12 years old, he took me to a game in Columbia, the New York Yankees, in an exhibition. Frank Rossetti was a shortstop, so it goes back a long ways. And Stan Musial was there. And after the game, we were standing around, and they were walking out. They'd already dressed. And Stan Musial walked by, and my dad said, "Why don't you ask him for his autograph?" And I said, "Oh, he wouldn't want to do that." He said, "Well, ask him." He'd say no. And I went up, he said, "Well, certainly I'll sign it." And he signed it so legible, and you could just read it. And I kept that for I don't know how many years. And then ironically, after all my years in baseball, retired, and a teammate of mine that played for the Cardinals, Ena Slaughter, his daughter asked me to have his funeral in Roxborough, North Carolina. And I got a call from the St. Louis Cardinals, and they said, "We're on our way in a jet, but we're a little late. Can you hold up the funeral until we get there?" And it was Lou Brock and Stan Musial and the owner of the Cardinals, and they came in. So we had dinner together afterwards, and Stan was there, and I told him, I said, "Stan, when I was 12 years old," he said, "Richardson, wait a minute, you're trying to make me feel old." I said, "No, I'm not, no, I'm not." And I told him, and he laughed. And I said, "The thing I remember is how legible you wrote your autograph. And I want you to know I'm doing the same thing. You can read mine, too."
Something that made a major difference to you.
Yeah.
You look around this room, you see a lot of memorabilia that relates to Yankee Stadium. Can you share with us what it was like the first time you walked into Yankee Stadium, and did it ever wear off the feeling of being in what was simply known in your world as the stadium?
I can remember, first of all, when I was 17 and worked out. I remember I put on my uniform, and Frank Rossetti looked at me and said, "Those cleats won't do. That must have been your high school cleats." I said, "They were." And he said, "I got a new pair right here that'll fit you. Wear those." And I didn't put them on. He said, "Well, why don't you put them on?" I said, "On this carpet?" There was carpet in there. And he said, "Certainly, put them on." So I put them on. But when I walked through the tunnel and saw that green grass, that stadium that would seat 60,000 coming from a town that at that time probably had 10,000, it was something you'll never forget. But even more important was that first game that I played there. It was a game that I'll not forget. Somebody sent me both the ticket stub for that first game. A former senator from Kentucky, Jim Bunning, was pitching. I got a base hit, I stole a base, and Yogi Berra hit a 3-run homer. We won the game 3-1. And I didn't touch the ball. Didn't have a ground ball or pop up. That was probably good. And that was my first game at the stadium. And then it quickly came by in a hurry. 9 years in a row, 9 out of 10, we won the pennant. In 55, 6, 7, 8, 60, 1, 2, 3, 4, we won the pennant. So we're in the World Series every year but one. One special thing that happened on the one year we lost, we didn't understand that we'd lost. The White Sox had a great year. They won well over 100 ball games that year. But the Yankees didn't have a single 300 hitter. And on the last day of the season, I was hitting .299, and Casey Stengel, our manager, came over to me and said, hey, and I'm not sure he ever learned my name, but said, hey, kid, if you can get a hit the first time up tomorrow, we'll take you out of the lineup, and the Yankees will have at least one 300 hitter. Well, word sort of got around that I needed a base hit, and Billy O'Dell was pitching. He's from Newberry, and we quail hunt together, and he sent word over, I'll be throwing it right in there for you. Brooks Robinson was playing third base, and he sent word over, I'll be playing real deep if you want to bunt. And the catcher was Joe Ginsberg. He said, I'll tell you what's coming. And the first base umpire said, just make it close. But I hit a line drive to right field, and my best friend Albert Pearson made a diving catch and caught it. But I got 2 hits the next 2 times up and ended up 301, so it turned out just fine.
Yankee managers.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about each one of them and their personalities and the impact they had on your life. Of course, the last one everybody's very familiar with. The first one, an old baseball guy all the way around. And then in the middle, sandwiched in between for the majority of your career, maybe as much impact on you as any other.
You got it right there. The first one was Casey Stengel. He was a renowned coach, and he hired good coaches. His coaches actually ran the ball club. Frank Corsetti would be in charge of the game activities. Jim Turner was the pitching coach, and Casey would be on the bench, and I've seen him fall asleep occasionally. But he had so much talent, and he knew how to handle the press in such a way that you get the maximum publicity. And he was kind of hard to play for because he'd pinch hit for you in the first inning. I remember one time he pinch hit for me in the first inning, and on the way by him, I wasn't even batting in the top of the lineup, but batting a little bit farther down. And I said, well, why'd you start me if you're going to pinch hit for me? And he followed me into the clubhouse, and he said, you get your little mitt and go down the bullpen and warm up Ryan Duran. That was my penalty. Ryan threw real hard, and he was wild. He'd throw it in the dirt. But he was my first manager. And then Ralph Houck was my coach in Denver. And he came up as a coach. And then in 1961, he took over the Yankees. And it was just like a world had been lifted. Stengel, I was always nervous. I never knew whether I'd play or somebody else was starting that day. I remember one game, the only game my dad saw, we were playing in the World Series against Milwaukee. And right before the game started, he came up to me and said, McDougal doesn't feel too good. He feels like he's too close at third base. He wants to play second base today, so you play third base today. Doesn't matter where you play. So, and I did, and the only game my dad saw, I played third. But then Ralph Houck took over. He was a private that went in the Green Beret and came out as a major, and just the toughest man I've ever met, and probably had more of an impact in my life than certainly any manager, but I can't think of any other person as well. And he was the manager during those years when we had the World Championships. He was the manager in 61 and 62 when Roger Maris and Mickey had such great years in hitting home runs and so forth. And then he moved up when Yogi Berra was named manager in 1964. Unusual situation that year because Yogi Berra was moving from catcher to the manager. That's tough to do that with all your teammates. And I remember Betsy and I were down in Florida in spring training. And he said to me, I'm going to come by and talk to you. And Betsy, he said, I'm going to have a clubhouse meeting tomorrow, and I want to go over some rules. I'm setting with you. And he went over to say, now we're going to work hard on the field. We'll have fun, but I'm going to set some rules. No swimming, no tennis, no golf, no and then he was going to say, no, I'm just kidding. We'll work hard, and we'll have fun. Well, he got through that work hard and have fun, and Mantle threw his bat down and said, I quit, and started to walk out, and you can imagine everything backfired. Everybody started laughing, and that's the way our season got off, and we were 2/3 of the way through the season, 9 games out of first place, no way to win, we didn't think. And Tony Kubek and I were invited out to the Billy Graham headquarters, Minneapolis, Minnesota. That was the headquarters of the Billy Graham Association at that time, and while we were there, picked up a little chorus book. I can't sing, Tony couldn't sing, but for some reason we picked it up, took it back to the room, and he said, I'd like to sing. He said, there's a pitcher on our club that has a harmonica. Actually, he's a batting practice pitcher. Let's call him and he can play and we'll sing. We did for about 3 hours, and next morning went down for breakfast. Teammates sitting there, you could tell they hadn't slept all night long. So what's the matter? I said, well, there were some drunks up over us singing all night long. We never got to sleep. And the rest of the story is that we went into Chicago for a 4-game series, so important, right at the end of the season. Had to win all 4. And Tony went down and bought a harmonica. And he gave me one, gave Tommy Tresh one, then he gave one to Phil Lentz. He bought 4. Meanwhile, we lost 4 games in a row. And you could have heard a pin drop. We got on our bus going out toward O'Hara Airport. Yogi sits in the front where all managers do, and all of a sudden you heard this beep, beep, beep of a harmonica in the back of the bus, and he thought, what is that? Didn't say anything. But then about 20 seconds later, heard it again. This time he jumped up and turned around and said, put that thing in your pocket. He didn't use those words, but something to that effect. And Phil was in the back of the bus, and he didn't hear him. He said, what did he say? What did he say? Mantle was sitting over across the aisle, and he said he couldn't hear you. Play it again, louder. Well, he did, and the rest is history. Yogi fined him $200, grabbed the harmonica, threw it, it hit Peppertone. The reporters said they wouldn't print it, it would look like decision. They printed it, it unified our ball club, and all of a sudden we went on a winning streak, and on the next to the last day of the season we won the pennant. And the Yankees won the pennant that year. And the next manager then was Johnny Keane, who was managing the Cardinals. Just didn't work out. He was a wonderful man, a great manager, but you don't pinch hit for Whitey Hope Ford in the 9th inning when he's pitching a shutout, you know, and just a lot of things that didn't work out. And so Ralph Houck came back after that, and I just can't think of anybody that had more of an impact in my life. He talked me into staying in baseball at a time when I was thinking about getting out and going into the ministry. And he said, you'll have far more influence if you stay in baseball. And he was right, and I sure appreciate him.
You're talking about so many of your teammates. You have the 61 group right here. You've mentioned the home run chase a couple of different times. Walk us through your memories of that era as we look at some of these figurines you have here in your office.
Well, with the hat on, number 1 there is me, and I was the leadoff for the Yankees, and then Tony Kubek was batting second. We switched off. I batted second most of the time, but this particular mint was made, and I was leading off. And then Maris always batted in front of Mantle. And even in 1961, when he hit 61 home runs, he didn't have a single intentional walk because of who was behind him. Mickey Mantle batted 4th. Elston Howard is 5th. That's Yogi Berra. And then Moose Gowan, and then Clete Boyer, and then Whitey Ford.
What was it like in the clubhouse of those 60s teams you played on? You talked about pennant after pennant, World Series opportunity after World Series opportunity. Your career at no point was without pressure. You were fighting for the World Championship year in and year out. What was it like to be a part of those teams?
Well, it was special. Even the Old Timers games, when they had the Old Timers game in a pecking order, they would have, I see right by this is Joe DiMaggio. And Joe DiMaggio was the great pride of the Yankees, and they would introduce the Old Timers, and you get to the end, it'd be Joe DiMaggio, and the stadium would just go into an unbelievable applause for him. And I saw that deteriorate. All these guys, out of those that I'm talking about, Maris, Mantle is in the Hall of Fame, Rizzuto was in the Hall of Fame, that played shortstop those early years with me. Whitey Ford's in the Hall of Fame. Joe DiMaggio came back as a coach, and he was there with us, and I think it all could be described by saying we were indeed a family. And it was a winning family. The Pinstripes were the team to play for at that time, and still today, everybody would like to play for them. But it was a wonderful time together and wonderful memories.
You share another thing in common with a number of these individuals we're discussing. You were given a day at Yankee Stadium.
Well, I surely was, and I can't believe that I was the 10th Yankee to have a day at Yankee Stadium. And when you can think of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, in fact, prior to the Yankees had Lou Gehrig speaking from the batter's box at Yankee Stadium. He knew he was going to die with Lou Gehrig disease, and it was the most poignant thing that I'd ever seen at that time when he got up and said how fortunate it's been for me to be a part of this family and to be a New York Yankee. And I was able to stand on that same location and say the same thing, except I ended up with saying, to God be the glory. But the honor of being a part of that family during that time, and even now in Old Timers games.
Well, beyond the stats and beyond all the baseball that's in this room, there's one more prominent picture that sits atop this shelving here. That was a lifetime contract that has worked out very well for you also.
Betsy and I got married, and we got married during the season. I started out with New York, and Betsy and I were engaged, and I was going to get married at the end of the season. We missed each other so much, and so finally, Betsy and I talked, and the Yankees sent me down to Denver. And I went to the owner of the ball club in Denver and said, said, "Can I have a week off to go home and get married?" And he said, "Silliest thing I've ever heard. Wait till the end of the season." I went to Ralph Houck, my manager. He said, "Absolutely, go ahead, take as long as you want." And I did, and the owner never said a word to me. But anyway, Betsy and I were married here in Sumter, drove out to Denver, got lost a little bit because they didn't have internet or maps or navigation at that time, and we did take a week off. But the bad thing was when I got there, I'd rented a little apartment, and I said, "Now, Betsy, this is where we live. And I hate to say this, but I'm going on a 17-day road trip. I'll see you in 17 days. But she's a trooper, and let's see, Whitey Herzog, Ralph Houck, Johnny Pesky, Tommy Lasorda, they were all on that ball club.
Wow.
Their wives pitched in and helped Betsy a little bit along the way. So it turned out fine. Probably the highlight of the awards that I've ever received, other than the 10th Yankee to have a day at Yankee Stadium, was winning the Lou Gehrig Memorial Award, presented by the Fraternity of Lou Gehrig at Columbia University in New York. I just really appreciate Lou Gehrig. I think of Gary Cooper, of course, when I think of Lou Gehrig, but I went hunting with a doctor who was in New York. This was an old-time doctor, and he had Lou Gehrig as a patient of his. And so I had a person that I could talk to that talked to me about Lou Gehrig. I just have always appreciated him as a consistent baseball player that not only played all of those games that Cal Ripken later broke, but that he had adversity and he overcame it.
You can't think about Lou Gehrig without thinking about adversity and the way he did overcome adversity. You had a great deal of that in your life. This career, with all of its bright and shining moments, was one in which there were a number of difficult moments along the way.
You know, I remember that Whitey Ford's son was a #1 draft choice, and when he signed, played in the minor leagues, he finally got hurriedly up to AAA. But the Red Sox asked him if he'd step back down to AA so that they could have a major league ball player come up from AAA. He said, "No, I don't like the game. I'm going to step away from it." And I was at that point in my life. I was signed at 17, and they sent me to Norfolk, Virginia, Class B, and I was over my head. I took the place of the best player on the club who went 3 weeks to a reserve program in the Marines. And I just did terrible. I didn't hit my weight. I just couldn't do anything right. And so finally, I called my dad and said, "You need to come up here. I'm ready to come home and call it quits and go back." And he came up, and the general manager and I all sat down together. And then I received a letter from my high school coach. My high school coach had written me a letter, and in that letter, he had the verse, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things should be added unto you." And that verse just encouraged me to hang in there, to be a part of seeing how we could work things out. The next thing you know, at 19, I was called up to the Yankees.
Life's not without those moments that you have to soldier through. Yes. But you left here, and that was quite a day for you. Talk about what it was like leaving Sumter and heading into that portion of your life, the baseball career that we all know so well.
I had so many friends. When you grow up in a small town, you know everybody, and they had put some little jars around the different places in the city, and they took up a collection. And I remember when I got on that bus leaving to go off for the very first time, I counted it, and it was $85. And to me at that time, that was a lot of money. And I thought, man, I'm going to be able to eat good for a while here now. But then very early in my career, I realized that there are other adversities that come along. And being away from home, being away from the family, being away from my wife, especially my children as they were growing up, prompted me to do what I thought was the right thing to do at that time, and that was to, at 30 years of age instead of 29, go ahead and terminate my time with the Yankees. Everybody thought I was crazy at the time because I was making a great salary and I was with a winning ball club. But it was the right move for me and probably the best thing I've ever done.
What do you think were the main characteristics that you developed growing up, whether it be here in Sumter in your family life, that allowed you to continue to persevere, to handle that adversity? What do you point back to, Coach, as those key qualities or key core values that you think served you so well?
I think I was reminded when Mickey Mantle and I became such close friends after baseball. And when Mickey Mantle called me, when he was at Baylor Medical Center, he was in between waiting for the liver transplant, he was in chemo and so forth. And he said to Betsy, who answered the phone at 5 o'clock in the morning, "Betsy, I want Bobby to pray for me." I remember that we prayed together, but I shared a verse with him that had meant so much to me. It says, "Delight yourself in the Lord. Find your joy in Him at all times. Never forget His nearness." And then it says, "Tell God in detail your problems, your anxieties, and the promises of peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep our hearts and minds as we follow the Lord Jesus Christ. And I think it's important that we first of all know Him and love Him and then walk with Him in our daily. And that walk is what carried me through ministry.
Your faith,
Yes.
the foundation.
Yes.
Well, thank you for that trip through memory lane and what great treasures you have there in the office. Obviously, your career so marked. We've talked about all the World Series, the special moments, whether it be your coaching days, your playing days developing. What are the main things that stand out to you as you look back across your playing days? Maybe a memory or two that you don't get asked about that often. Everybody wants to talk about the World Series games we've talked about, the individuals who you interacted with, but what, when Bobby Richardson has his quiet moments, come to mind that you're most grateful for?
You know, that's a good question, and I think it would go back to, if I look at the career as a whole, it was the fact that Betsy was involved with me all the way. We got married before I came up to New York and actually to stay and play regularly. And she has stuck with me. She watched every ball game, either coming into the game, bringing the boys in. The boys would come in the clubhouse, or she'd watch the game on television. We were on the road. And I can remember in particular the '64 World Series. Here was Yogi Berra, who was my teammate, and they managed the Yankees. And he had brought the club back to where on the last day of the season, next to the last day of the season, we won the pennant. We were playing the Cardinals in the World Series. And we lost that game 4-3, that last game. And I remember so much that that on the way back, Yogi was on the plane and Betsy was sitting down, and Yogi came up and sat by her. Said, "Betsy, I'm going to meet with the Yankees tomorrow. I'm going to ask for a 2-year contract." Most managers at that time, in fact, I think all managers had 1-year contracts at that time. And we were talking back and forth, and Betsy made this statement in fun because she wouldn't want it to not to hurt me, but she said, if Bobby, that's me, hadn't made that error in the World Series in that next to the last game and loaded the bases, and Ken Boye hit a grand slam, we lost the game 4-3. Hadn't it been for that, you'd have been the winning manager, and you certainly would get a 2-year contract or anything you asked for. I laughed because I knew what she was doing. She was trying to make him feel good, and he did feel good. But then the next day driving home, I couldn't believe it when we on the radio heard that he had been fired as the Yankees. And that Johnny Keane, who managed the Cardinals, had been named the new manager of the Yankees. Well, that let us know that they didn't make that decision overnight. They'd made it during the summer sometime and just didn't think he was going to bring the ball club back. That's one of the sad days, but I guess what I'm saying is that through thick and thin, Betsy was with me all the way. And she was involved. When I told her I wanted to retire, she was all for it, but said, if you want to play, I'm all for that. Just whatever I wanted. And our kids have really enjoyed being in the locker room in the years in baseball.
When you talk about thick and thin, the difficulties that you have to go through, obviously there's all kind of advice out there for young players, for young men and women who are getting ready to chart their own course in life. But beyond how many hours should be spent in the cage and which team you should try to play with and which individual you should look to for characteristics and technique, what are the life skills that you would point to for young players, for young individuals in general, that are necessary to be successful not only in baseball but also in life?
I remember I had a young boy that flew across the country because he thought I could introduce him to somebody that would help him have a chance to sign. His desire was to play baseball. He had not gotten that in high school and so forth. And Betsy and I sat down and talked to him for a long time, and he really was trying, his goal was to play professional baseball. And I see it now as I have occasion to maybe speak at Cal Ripken's place down at the beach, and they have teams come in from all over the country. 76 teams will come in at one time, and out of the 76 teams, they'll all line up with their uniforms on and parade in holding the flag from where they're from, and then they all sit in a circle, and they have a major league ball player that'll come down and say a word to them. And I've been asked to do that several times, and I remember thinking that my encouragement to them, I think so many times these little boys have tremendous pressure from their parents. They want them to be a ball player, and they send them to the travel ball that costs a lot of money, and they think that that'll help them get signed. But my admonition to young ball players is to enjoy it, to really enjoy. You don't see the pickup games like you used to see when I was playing. Everything's organized, and that's the only chance you get. But when you play those games, I think the American Legion program is wonderful. They line up before every ball game and repeat some rules. Number one is keep the rules, and you have rules in baseball that you have to abide by: the number of outs, the way to run, the bases, and so forth. Keep faith with your teammates. Keep a stout heart in defeat. Keep your pride in victory. Keep a sound soul, a clean mind, and a healthy body. And these are rules not only for baseball, but for life itself. And I think I could amplify those by saying that the sound soul and a clean mind is to know and love and walk daily with the Lord in your life. In fact, my favorite verse would be, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. The Lord might have a different purpose in your life. It might not be baseball, but you might be a doctor that saves lives. There are many directions you can go in.
And that's been your view, that everything has been a blessing because of the faith that you've placed in God.
Yes.
How proud are you that your fingerprints are on the South Carolina Gamecock, Liberty Flames, and Coastal Carolina Chanticleers programs?
I didn't think I'd like coaching as much as I did. I really enjoyed coaching at the University of South Carolina. I made so many friends along the way. I was introduced to the team in 1970. Tommy Moody, who does the play-by-play for the Gamecocks now, was my second baseman. And I had some good ball players, but we did build that program up. And I had 3 ball players that stood out among all the players that I coached. One was Hank Small. He was an All-American from Atlanta, Georgia. One was Gary Hancock. He was an All-American on a first-round draft choice from Tampa, Florida. And then the third one was Earl Bass. Earl Bass, I saw him as a 12-year-old in the World Series of, let me think what it was called, Dixie Youth World Series in Florence. It was an off day in New York, and I flew down to speak at the banquet. And I sat by Jerry Clower. And I was sitting by him, and he said, Richardson, he said, I know you just got down here, but there's one ball player that stands above everyone here. My son's on a team from Mississippi. They're here from all over the world. He said, but one boy stands out, and I can't find his name. Here's his number. And I said, I'll find it for you. And I looked it up, and I said, his name is Earl Bass. I didn't see him for 25 years. 25 years later, I was sharing a program with him in Tennessee. And he said, tell me something, Richardson, whatever become of Earl Bass? He remembered his name. And I said, I can't believe you remembered his name, but he was an All-American. He played for me at the University of South Carolina, and he finally lost one game. In the last game he played for the College World Series, I said he was an All-American. Now, the sad part of that is all 3 of those guys have already gone on to be with the Lord. They passed away early. But the good part is all 3 of them knew and loved the Lord Jesus, and I had the funeral of all 3. So that makes it satisfying when you know you've had a part in young people's life.
Well, and that's been the mark of your life, the investments you've made, not just in the game of baseball, not just in athletics, not just in this country and this culture, but also in the lives of people. When your time is said and done, how do you, Bobby Richardson, hope to be remembered?
Well, it's interesting you'd say that, and I've never thought about it exactly like this. But in a moment, you and I are going over to a baseball field that's been named after me. And way back when Betsy and I started dating each other, my dad was in the tombstone business, marble and granite. And I remember going down and picking a piece of granite, put some rubber on it, and then writing in my own handwriting a little verse that'll answer your question. It says, only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And they allowed me to put that under the plaque that names the stadium out here. And that would be the summation of my life, the important thing. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last.
Mr. Bobby Richardson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. You too, Leah. This complex started in 1966. That was my last year with the Yankees. And it has 4 wonderful fields. It has all the facilities for public relations, for a broadcast booth, for restrooms, restaurant. And as you walk into the gate here, They wanted to do a statue, and I said, no, a statue costs too much, but they put this plaque up. But the thing I'm most proud of is my dad was in the tombstone business, and this is a little granite marker that Betsy and I were able to put down that kind of hopefully shares a little bit of what my life was like. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. When we walk up this way, you'll see a big baseball that somehow I was able to get my autograph on. But it's kind of fun to come out here, and I know so many of the people that their grandchildren are playing now, and to walk through and watch them start out in baseball. Baseball has been a family game for a long time, and most kids have an opportunity to play. This is the baseball I'm talking about, and you can see that's my signature on a baseball, and a beautiful park right on the other side. But it's amazing how these dugouts, and they're all busy.
Full circle to Sumter, South Carolina.
Full circle, yes. Well, one of the things that's happened in my life was playing the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1960. Mickey Mantle said it was his biggest disappointment because we felt like we had a better team. Mazeroski hit the home run. We were in the clubhouse afterwards, and Mantle was actually crying. And I remember we were starting to dress and get ready to get on the plane to come back to New York. And a fellow walked in that just happened to be the president of Sport Magazine. He said, "Bobby, you've been named the most valuable player in the World Series." Now, we lost the series. I never knew it could happen that way, and it never has before or since. But at that particular year, they picked me as the most valuable player. And the present is a Corvette, a 60 Corvette. And I remember they said, if you'll come down to a dealership in New York tomorrow when you get home, we'll have it ready for you, and you can drive it back home to South Carolina. Well, I did. I had a friend that was up there, and he actually drove it home for me and had a parade downtown, and it was a wonderful day. But I couldn't get my family in it. It's a two-seater. And I like to hunt, and I was going by the Pontiac place one day, and I saw a beautiful station wagon, but I saw a Jeep, and I said, that's what I want right there. And I went in, and before I left out of there, I had a new station wagon, and I had a Jeep, and my old station wagon was there. And so it was the best trade I ever made. I liked it.
Still a priceless picture of the 60.
It's a priceless picture. This is a picture. It had red upholstery and white 1960 Corvette. And the ironic thing is that Ralph Terry was the pitcher that gave up the home run. 2 years later, we're playing the Giants, and Ralph Terry was the pitcher in the final game, in the final inning, in the final out. And he threw the ball, and McCovey hit it hard, but he hit it right to me at second base. And so he got the Corvette in 1962 after giving up that home run to Mazeroski.
Quite the story of baseball redemption on his part.
Right. And by that time, it was a home run. It had gone out of the park. And I remember knowing the fans would be on the field, I grabbed my hat, put it in, and took off running to the dugout. And if you've seen highlights of the film, there are just hundreds of people before Mazeroski could get to home plate. He probably had 100 folks that were touching the bases with him and going around. It was an exciting time for the Pirates at that time, and a wonderfully big win for them. They had a reunion. Bob Costas hosted a reunion. Bing Crosby owned a part of the Pittsburgh Pirates ball club, and he was so nervous he didn't go to the game, but he wanted to see it, so he filmed it. He had a special film crew just film that 7th game, and they found it in a wine cellar. And so Bob Costas got it and mastered the tape, got it in good shape, rented a theater in Pittsburgh. 1,600 Pittsburgh fans came out. The whole Pittsburgh team was there. And Bob had called all the Yankees. None of them would come. And he called me and I said, Bob, I'm speaking at a sport banquet in upstate New York. I would love to come, be glad to come if it weren't for that. And he called me back and said, if we move it one day, will you come? And I said, I'll be glad to. And so I spoke at the banquet, flew to Pittsburgh. My youngest son, Rich, went with me, and I remember so well. We got in the theater, 1,600 people there. The whole Pittsburgh team was there. Bill Verdon, myself, and Bob Costas were on the stage. Mazeroski was in the hospital. He had kidney stones, so he wasn't there for the initial filming. He later dubbed his part in. But I remember two things. Number one, I remember that one stat was in that game, there wasn't a single strikeout the whole game. Quite unusual for a 10-9 baseball game in a World Series like that. And the second thing I remember is that Bob Costas said, how many Yankee fans are here today? And I heard one little weak voice said, I am. And that was my son, Richie. He was the only one. It's interesting because not too many people know this, but Tony Kubek and I had a room together and we started talking about our families. And we said, you know, we've won 9 out of 10 years. We've done it. But we're missing out on the priority of our life, our families. And we need to spend more time with them. And the two of us decided right then and there at 29, we were going to retire. Sports Illustrated heard about it. They sent a photographer over. He took the picture. I've got a copy of the picture here that the Sports Illustrated guy took. And he was going to put us on the cover of Sports Illustrated, shortstop, second base at 29, retiring from the Yankees to spend more time with their family. What happened was very simply that Ralph Houck came up and said, I just signed Bobby Mercer to a contract. And he said, I want one of you, doesn't matter which one, play one more year and break Bobby Mercer in. Well, we talked about it and prayed about it, and I said, well, I really want to retire. And so they said, okay. Tony said, I'll play. So Tony played, but he got called into the reserve program. And so he really didn't play. The very first week of the season, actually before that, he got his notice that he was going to be drafted and would have to spend all summer with the reserve program. And so Ralph called and said, Tony can't play, will you play one more year? And so I did, and that was good.
And that special relationship continues to this day, and it wasn't just middle infield chemistry between you and Tony Kubek. That's a lifelong friendship that has been something special.
It really has. We know his family well. He knows our family well. He calls. Their birthdays, Tony's and my wife Betsy's, are just a day apart. I get them mixed up all the time, but we have a lot of fun about that. But he's been a very special friend over the years. And Whitey, by the way, was just a wonderful pitcher. And I'll say that because his son ended up playing for me, and I'll show you his picture right over here. He was my switch-hitting shortstop at the University of South Carolina, and that's a family picture right up there. And he was about 7 or 8 years old there, but #1 draft choice his junior year at the University of South Carolina. Wonderful ball player. Could have played a dozen years in baseball, and I'll point him out right on the right-hand side there. You can see Whitey Ford, and then sitting right under his son on the right-hand side. And that's my wife sitting way up at the top with one of my sons. They said the other one was crying and didn't get in the picture. I'm not sure about that.
Let's talk Gamecocks just a moment. You can't look far in this house without seeing something that's got a Gamecock on it. Now, you're twice a Gamecock, being from Sumter and also
right.
Your time in Columbia. You were the head coach for the University of South Carolina, leading them to the College World Series in the 70s for the very first time. What's Carolina meant to you? And when you look back on those days, what are the main memories that stick out?
You know, I'll never forget when I came home, I signed a 5-year contract with the Yankees when Paul Dietzel asked, and when Ralph Houck asked me to play that extra year. He gave me a 5-year contract. And so when I came home, I not only had 3-4 years ahead to receive a salary from the Yankees, not very many duties at all. But Paul Dietzel came over and asked me to be the baseball coach. And I said to him, you know, I've thought about it, but I'm just not sure, and I don't think it's for me. Thank you for asking me. Came the second time, said the same thing to him. Third time, he said, I'm not going to waste your time, but I really would like to have you as baseball coach. And I said, well, I'm ready now. And so I said, let me get a release from the Yankees. So I went back to the Yankees and asked them if they'd release me. They said, we'll pay you off, but wait a minute. If you want to, you can come back and be our major league coach. You can be our broadcaster, or you can be our AAA manager. And I said, no, the reason I got out was travel. And he said, well, when you get settled down there, give us a call. We'll bring the Yankees down to play your club. I sort of forgot about that, but I became the baseball coach at the university. I was introduced to the team in 1970, and we struggled those first years because we needed a lot of work, and finally, along about 3 years later, we lost out to Miami by 1 run in regional play, and I thought, you know, they did say they'd come down. Let me call the Yankees. And so I called Lee McPhail, and he said, well, we got a problem. And I thought that was a no. He said, we're traveling north from spring training with the Mets. And I thought that was the problem. And then he said, would it be all right if the Yankees and Mets come down and play your ball club? And I said, you better believe it. And so we worked it out, and we played 3 against the Yankees, 3 against the Mets. They played each other, and the lights just put our teams on the map, and the fans that came out were unbelievable, and they stayed with us. So we had a fan crew after that followed us very closely.
Ended up landing you at the College World Series, no less.
And the next year we finished second in the nation in the College World Series. Yeah. Wonderful memories. That's right, yeah.
How many sports did you play?
Just basketball and baseball.
Basketball.
They just honored me last year as being All-American in basketball. Did you know that? I have a little roommate, teammate, that we had the Romeo Club here. He was a 5-letter man in high school.
Wow.
Cheerleader as well as all the sports.
Wow. How
Then
did
he
you
went-
find the time?
He's a retired general now.
That's incredible.
Instead of my mail falling off, my mail is picked up. I'm getting probably anywhere from 10 to 15 letters or envelopes with balls or cards in it to sign. And what it is, fathers and sons are getting together. And they're saying my grandfather was a Yankee fan, my dad was a Yankee fan, and I'm starting my son off. Would you sign these for him? He's starting a collection.
Biggest difficulties that you faced along the way, toughest challenges. What makes the short list for you?
I think it was deciding what I wanted to do after baseball. I remember the first time I spoke, a doctor here in town invited me to speak at Rotary. And he introduced me, and I got up, and my mind went blank. And I said, well, if you got any questions about baseball, I'll be glad to answer them. And somebody asked me a question, I got through it fine. And then about 4 years later, I got another thrill. I won the Golden Gavel from Toastmasters International. Walter Cronkite won it the year before, and they paid my whole family's way to go out to California, and I had to speak to 1,000 Toastmasters, and they critiqued my talk. I mean, I wasn't supposed to be there, my background, but the Lord just gave me that opportunity. And for these years now, it's just given me unbelievable opportunities. When I was at Roger Maris's funeral, Mickey sat down by me, and I had just had the eulogy representing the Yankees at Roger's funeral. And he said, I want you to have my funeral. Never thought it'd come along, but it did come along, and I had it. And speaking in Augusta, they had a picture there. And this is me on the left and Mickey Mantle, and showing me around Yankee Stadium. And then they, in turn, changed it a little bit and put my head on his body and his head on my body. And the idea is that he came to know Christ, that I was instrumental in his coming to know Christ as his Savior. This picture really means a lot to me.
You ended up writing a book a little bit later on, Coach, that you called Impact Player because of the impact that was made by your life, not only on the baseball diamond, but also because of your faith.
Well, Tyndall Publishing Company published it, and they also asked me to call one of my friends to write the foreword. And I was going to call Mariano Rivera because he and I had a wonderful relationship, but George McGovern had been a longtime chaplain for the Yankees. He said, no, the one that needs to write it is Joe Girardi, who was the manager of the Yankees during those years. And he went to him, and without knowing anything about the book except the name of the title of the book, he wrote his foreword. And that's the best part of the book. If you read that book, his remarks were honoring to me, and I appreciate it so much.
Well, here's your pride and joy. This is what it all led to.
Well, you're right. I retired at 30, and I'm 84 now. And it's turned out that our family of 5 has grown to 49. Just this last week, we had a little grandson born that made number 49, counting the spouses and all. It's a wonderful family, and it's one of the best decisions I ever made, to get out of baseball a little bit early and spend more time with my family. Family means a great deal to me, and I appreciate it very much.
Now, tell us the story of how this family got started. I believe there was a church that a couple of different individuals were on different sides of, and they had to find a way together.
Well, that's true. That's true. Betsy moved to Sumter. She's from a little crossroad community that doesn't have a stoplight or a yellow light or anything, but it's called Alcaloo, South Carolina. In the 4th grade, she moved to Sumter and moved to the same church that I was. She sat on the other side with the adults, and sat with her mother, and I sat on the other side with the younger people. And I kept watching. I spotted her, and I think she spotted me. And one day we decided we'd both at the same time walk across and speak. And we walked across, and all we said was hello and walked on by. But she was playing softball, and I knew the softball coach, and he introduced me. And we were out at the fair, and I decided then I'm going to ask her for a date. I know she's young, but I'm going to ask her for a date. And she had walked off and got in the line to ride the Lupo plane. And I said, I'm not going to do it today. I'll wait till later. I didn't want to ride that Lupo plane, but we got together. And then the rest of it is 49.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a life.